Hey guys, welcome to my first drive video on BMW's 220i Coupé. As many of you know, I've had the opportunity to drive their flagship M240i X-Drive a couple of times now. First time was at the end of last year out in Germany at the global launch for the new 2 Series Coupé, and more recently in the UK I got my hands on that black one. The weather was awful, the roads weren't particularly good, but it was a real life first drive, if you like. If you missed either of those videos, I'll put them in the description below. In early May, I'm actually getting my hands on a long-term M240i X-Drive that I'll have for about 3 months. So please feel free to leave any video suggestions or topics you want me to cover on that car in the comments below. As for this entry-level 220i, well, I've got this car for the next 10 days or so, and I will be shooting a video at the end of that time. So once again, please leave any comments and questions below that I could potentially cover on the final video with this car. Under the bonnet, we have a familiar B48, which is a 2-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged engine, which you find in many BMWs and Minis today. In fact, it's the same unit that was in that 420i long-termer that I had at the beginning of last year. It's the same basic unit you find in cars like the M135i, but in this particular car it's set to a lower tune, so you're looking at 184 horsepower and 300 newton meters of torque, and that runs through a familiar ZF 8-speed automatic gearbox. And that ZF gearbox feeds all of that power and torque to the rear axle only. So this is a traditional BMW, if you like, because remember, this new 2 Series Coupé is based on BMW's 3 Series platform, unlike their current 1 Series and 2 Series Grand Coupé, which is based on a Mini front-wheel drive platform. This base 220i tips the scales at just under 35 grand here in the UK. And even with all of this press cars options and packages thrown at it, it still sits at just under that magical 40 grand. We'll go through the options that this car's got once we jump inside. In terms of styling, well, you probably already know what I think about the 2 Series Coupé. I really like it on the whole. I think the real controversial bit, unlike many other modern BMWs, is the rear end. I'm just not convinced by these short little stubby lights and just the proportions in general. If you want to fix the rear end of the new 2 Series Coupé, get it in black, because it kind of sorts everything out, in my opinion anyway. But overall, I think it looks really good. The only issue with Melbourne red, and a lot of reds in general, actually it's the same with the Toronto red, is they look fantastic when they're clean, but when they're dirty, they just tend to wash out a little bit. And let's face it, here in the UK, for many months of the year, it's impossible to keep your car clean. So do bear that in mind. It looks really good clean, but not so great once it's dirty. I'll keep it dirty for the final video, so hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. Let's jump inside, check out the interior, and talk about the spec. It's a very familiar place to sit, surprise, surprise. Modern BMW, I spend a lot of time in them. But most importantly, just like the flagship M240i X-Drive, it's a really nice place to sit, and it feels like I'm in a 3 or 4 Series. In fact, it feels very similar to my M3 because I don't have extended leather. I've got a very familiar steering wheel in front of me, very familiar digital dash, and in fact it's the bigger digital dash. It's the one that is in the 3 and the 4 Series. It's not the smaller one that is in the current 1 Series. So once again, feels very, very familiar. We'll look at the spec now. I've actually got it on my phone. There's a few confusing options on there because they don't quite tally up to what this car's got, and I think that's because of chip shortages. As many of you probably know, it's not as easy as it used to be in terms of ordering spec these days. Your BMW or Audi, whatever, is going to turn up maybe with a couple of things missing as a small sacrifice in terms of actually getting the car on the road, because manufacturers just can't get their hands on enough chips, and chips obviously control a lot of today's technology in cars. So this particular one, as we talked about, retails at just under 35 grand as a base spec 220i M Sport trim. This has the gorgeous Melbourne red paintwork, which is optional at £595. And it has the standard, I think they call it Sensortech interior. Now, some of you might want full leather interior, but as we're going to find out, and as I found out on the way down here, this sort of Alcantara actually gives you some really good support and is very warm during the winter months compared to the leather. Again, with the trim, piano black is standard. Looks fantastic piano black when it's new, when it's clean, and when it's not scratched. But the opposite applies when it's 6 months old or 12 months old. It's very easy to scratch, especially all of this down here by the gear stick. Yeah, you'll get lots and lots of marks and scratches. You only have to look at it sometimes and it will scratch. There is an optional sort of hexagon aluminium looking thing which doesn't look as good when it's clean, especially, but it's going to be more practical in the long run. We then have the technology pack, which is £575. That's Wi-Fi hotspot, parking assistant, and enhanced Bluetooth with wireless charging bay. And this has actually got a wireless charging bay, which I think is quite unusual because, again, going back to those chip shortages, you can get a Tech Pro or Technology Plus pack, which this car doesn't have, and that adds Parking Assistant Plus, so like surround view, drive recorder, and a few other bits and pieces, but this car doesn't have that. Then we have in this car, on top of the technology pack, we have the comfort pack, which consists of 4 different options. So front lumbar support on the driver's side, comfort access, so keyless access if you like, electric front seats, memory on the driver's side, and a heated steering wheel. The M Sport Pro Pack. Now the Pro Pack's very important on the M240i, as I've talked about many times, because it actually alters the size or the width of the wheels and the tyres. It also adds those wheel arch extenders that are body coloured, which I think just sort of enhance the aggression of the M240i, and obviously with the wider, bigger Michelins that the Pro Pack comes with, then it's a bonus. But on this car, it's slightly different. So the Pro Pack is £2.5 grand, but it does come with 9 options. So you upgrade to the 19-inch jet black 791M wheels, which you can see on the outside of this car. We've got the M Sport brake calipers, comes with sun protection glass, Harman Kardon sound system, which is always good, especially when you've just got the 4-pot to listen to. You kind of want that upgraded sound system. BMW individual light shadow line, so there's like a black trim on the headlights. M Sport spoiler, which is black on the boot. Individual high gloss shadow line, so all of the black bits around the front, especially on the intakes and stuff. Yeah, it just helps improve the look of the car. M Sport seat belts, so you have the M colours on your seat belt. Apparently they add at least 20 horsepower, and sports automatic transmission with paddles. Obviously it comes standard with this transmission, but I think maybe the paddles aren't standard if you don't get the M Pro Pack, but I don't know, could be wrong. And all of those options together make this car's retail price on the road £39,900 on today's configurator, so just under that 40 grand mark. And there's pretty much everything in here, as I've discovered this morning, that I could ever want. There's no options that I don't want. This car also has a head-up display, which I believe is part of the tech pack, but then on the paperwork I got, it said that it was deleted, so it's definitely here. I'm very confused by that, so please let me know in the comments if I'm going crazy. But this one definitely has a head-up display as well, which is really handy and is the same one that you essentially get in your 3 and 4 Series. Right, let's get this car out on the road and see what it's like to drive, see what my initial impressions are. about is driving position. Well, we've already mentioned that the cabin itself is lovely and pretty much a 3 or 4 series, and surprise, surprise, from the driver's seat, it feels pretty much the same as well. For someone tall and lanky like me, well, I can find a really nice and comfortable driving position or a sportier position when I get on one of my favourite roads. This is a memory seat as well, so I can have a preset for me and one for Lou. This particular car doesn't have adaptive suspension, and I'm not sure if it's actually available on this base 220i. Should have done my homework, but I could find that out for the next video. This one doesn't have it, so regardless of whether you're in comfort or sport, the actual damper rate, spring rate, etc., well, it feels exactly the same. So it's a passive setup, one setting if you like. There's nothing wrong with that if the manufacturer gets it right. And I have to say, in the couple of hours that I've been behind the wheel of this car on some typical choppy A and B roads, I think it's really good. It's stiff enough to support the car and let you know that you're in something that is relatively sporty, because it's a 2 Series Coupe, even though it has less than 200 horsepower. But more importantly, I think for the 220i customer, is the ride quality itself is pretty good, especially as this particular car has P0s on it. P0s have quite stiff sidewalls and usually, I wouldn't say ruin the ride, but they definitely don't help with the ride quality for a car in the UK. But this particular car, yeah, it feels pretty good. We might only have 184 horsepower and 300 newton meters of torque. That used to be sort of hot hatch territory back in the day, but hot hatches back in the day weighed a lot less than this. But this doesn't weigh as much as you might think. In fact, it's 200 kilos lighter than an M240i X-Drive. And there's 2 reasons for that. Firstly, it's not X-Drive, it's rear-wheel drive, so you lose some weight that way. And secondly, it has a B48, the 4-cylinder 2-litre, as opposed to the B58, which is a 3-litre 6-cylinder. And that B58 comes with a lot more cooling, radiators, etc. So it's quite a heavy combined unit, if you like, whereas this 48 is somewhat lighter. So although, yeah, on paper it has basically exactly half the power of the flagship M240i, in terms of power to weight ratio, well, it doesn't have exactly half of the power to weight. It actually has a lot more than that. So it doesn't feel pedestrian slow, but if you jumped straight out of a flagship M240i and into this one, well, you'd definitely notice the power difference. This would feel, I would say, somewhat underpowered. While we're talking about that, in fact, that 420i long-termer that I had at the beginning of 2021, well, has the same engine, same output as this car, and actually the 420i only weighs about 20-25 kilos more than this car, which you'd kind of expect because it's on the same platform. And my initial impressions of driving this car compared to that car, although that was about a year ago now, so it's hard to sort of reflect and get it exactly right, but my initial impressions are the 420i had a slightly better front end. I think the 4 Series in general is a bit stiffer than the 2 Series, but really they're very similar. And when you look at their list price, well, a 420i is almost £6,000 more than this 220i. When you combine the fact that the interiors are very, very similar, well, I think you really are getting a bit of a bargain with this 220i. Let's put it over into sport. In fact, let's press it again and bring up my individual sport. where I've preset some of my favourite settings, if you like. There's not too many in this car because, as we talked about, it has a passive suspension system, so there's no settings for the suspension. But in my individual, I've got the steering weight set to comfort, which is the lighter of the two. I find sport just too heavy. In fact, in most BMWs I find it really artificial and heavy, and it removes any of that remaining steering feel, which isn't much in a BMW e-Pass system. I've got my throttle response and engine response set to sport, because, well, we're only talking about 184 horsepower and 300 newton meters of torque, so it's not going to set the world on fire, and having that extra pickup with the throttle definitely helps spool the turbo up a little bit quicker, etc. And also that changes the gearbox setting into a more aggressive sport setting. But whenever I go into sport, I usually push that across, which gives me sports automatic, and then I pull a paddle, and then I've got a manual gearbox, and it's actually not too bad. I think in isolation this car would feel quick enough, but if you jump out of something fast like my M3 Competition X Drive, obviously it's not going to feel that quick getting out of something like that, but it doesn't feel too bad. It's just coming out of something like this left-hander up this hill, you put your foot on the floor and it's not really gaining that much momentum, which is good for your license. You can certainly have a lot of fun on this road with your foot quite far down on the accelerator without worrying about your speed, but it definitely doesn't feel what I would call quick. In fact, BMW claim that this will do the 0 to 62 sprint in 7.5 seconds, which is pretty reasonable, and onto a top speed of 146 miles an hour, which again is fast enough, especially if you're only ever going to drive this car in the UK. As with that 420i, this car has got me wondering about its slightly bigger brother, the 230i. That model's about £3,500 more expensive base price, and it comes with essentially the same engine, same gearbox, pretty much the same car, but they've remapped the ECU to produce an extra 60 horsepower. So I think that produces about 245 horsepower and a bit more torque. Now, when you're talking about a car that weighs pretty much exactly the same, well, I think that would be a real sweet spot. It would give you everything that this car's got, but a bit more fun when you go out for your spirited drive. And then it's not going to be OTT like the M240i might be for a lot of people. Let's just enjoy this little twisty bit down here. Let's push it a little bit and see what happens with the front end. Nice, good feel. Remember, we've only got 225 section front tyres. Should have turned the traction off there. Talking of traction, I did play around with that earlier on and turn it completely off, which is the setting that I'd be in if I did take it for a spirited drive, especially off camera. You're never going to have issues with grip in this car. The rear tyres are 255 section, and even launching it from a standstill with everything off, you get about half a second of wheel spin, and then they hook up and off you go. And I think even if it was wet and cold, well, you'd be really hard pushed to be able to drift this car or get the tail out under acceleration, which again probably isn't a bad thing for someone looking at a 220i, but yeah, it just kind of gives you an idea of the sort of power and torque that is available. I'm going to end this video here because this is just the first drive video. As I said at the start of the video, please leave any comments etc below or ideas for the video that I filmed with this car in about 10 days time, just before I give it back to BMW UK. I'll be able to feed back a lot more information, obviously living with the car for the next 10 days, and I'm really looking forward to it. Just like with that 420i, it's a really pleasant, nice place to spend some time, and yeah, hopefully I can feed back lots more information to you lot in a couple of weeks time. Until my next video, take it easy and I'll see you soon. Cheers.